So in terms of an employer's duty to accommodate, there's actually two aspects to the duty. There's a substantial aspect or substantive aspect and a procedural aspect. In terms of the substantive aspect, the question that has to be asked at the end of the day is, in terms of the accommodation that's being offered to the disabled employee, is this accommodation appropriate? Is it suitable? If an accommodation is not being offered, then the question that's asked under this element is, why did you not grant the accommodation? What are the reasons for not granting the accommodation? So there's this substantive aspect, but there's also a procedural aspect. Did the employer make the right efforts, enough extensive efforts to address the situation? And when we have courts and tribunals look at this, the courts and tribunals are looking at both aspects. So you could be bang on in terms of what you're doing, in terms of a substantive response. We're accommodating this particular employee by doing X, Y, and Z, but you could fail on the procedural side. It took us 3 years to get there, and we ignored the employee along the way, and we didn't sit down with the employee until the employee threatened lawsuits, human rights complaints, whatever. Well, that's not acceptable. The employer can't do that. There's a procedural aspect that requires the employer to focus on that as much as the substantive piece. Now, relative to an employee's duty, linking into the duty to accommodate, employees certainly have to cooperate. It's a joint process in terms of determining what kinds of modifications may be necessary or accommodations in the workplace. And this is a very important principle, the next one. And this is often misconstrued by employees, that you're not entitled to a perfect accommodation or a preferred accommodation. All you're entitled to is an accommodation that meets your specific needs in the context of the disability you have, and that's quote-unquote reasonable at the end of the day. Well, what's reasonable? Well, the parties try and sort that out, and obviously if they can't, ultimately a human rights tribunal will tell you what's reasonable or not, or a court will do so. But this is a factor that's often overlooked by employees. Employees, to some extent, obviously not a general rule, but some employees think because they have a disability that automatically should lead to a preferred or perfect accommodation. Now, we're going to start to take a look at some of the cases. I'm going to look at 3 or 4 human rights tribunal cases, and then we're going to look at a court decision. But starting with the human rights tribunal, the first case, the Baber case, involved a high school teacher with multiple issues. She had an anxiety disorder, there was depression, there was a leukemia condition, so the teacher's off work. And she herself personally kept saying to her school, I'm unable to return to work, I'm unable to return to work. But the strange thing was, there was some medical information that had been given to the employer that in fact said that she was able to return to work, although there was some qualification on the medical reports in that regard. As this case evolved, the school board actually gave this employee 3 options. So she's absent right now from work and insisting that she's disabled, and the school said to her, look, option 1, you can apply for LTD benefits, put in your medical reports, apply for LTD. Option 2, we want the school nurse to call your family doctor to discuss your situation and to clarify whether or not you can work. Option 3, undergo an independent medical, and let's determine fitness for work. The teacher refused all 3 options. She provided notes from her family doctor ultimately saying that these doctors, quote unquote, recommended that instead of doing her regular teaching duties, she should be given a teacher librarian position. And the tribunal ultimately commented on this word recommended in the doctor's notes. That's a bit wishy-washy. It's not like a doctor saying the only thing that will accommodate this particular employee is X. That's a strong advocation from a doctor when a doctor says that. When a doctor says in a note, well, I recommend something, it's more wishy-washy, and the tribunal commented on that. So the school board in this case kept asking the employee, give us more information, give us better information, and tell us if you've got any ideas about how you can justify your absence from work, because We want you back at work. Teacher refused to provide information. They placed her on an unpaid leave. They started warning her about termination. She didn't select any options, didn't provide the information, and she was terminated. So ultimately, the tribunal decided that the substantive aspect of the duty to accommodate in this case was not triggered because she failed to provide the information. So the tribunal said the duty to accommodate doesn't give employees the ability to refuse to provide that information. Duty to accommodate doesn't require an employer to tolerate an ongoing, unsubstantiated absence by an employee. And that's common sense. The bargain is the employer pays the money, the employee provides the services. If the employee's not there, the employee needs to justify why they're not there. The tribunal also said that in this case, she knew that the employer wanted the information. She refused to provide it, so the employer in this case did not breach its duty to accommodate because of the conduct of the employee. So the tribunal reaffirmed the reciprocal duty of the employee to provide necessary information and to participate in the process.